Do you have my slides? The ones I sent you, or let's see. Where is the slide person? Well, maybe I can.
Can you bring up the next slides?
Did you send?
Who is it?
Is there
Well,
someone?
why don't I get started? I think I can go over some of the more important points. So an academic health system like Johns Hopkins is a little bit of both, right? We are both an evidence generator and an evidence consumer. And you would hope that that would lead to a lot of systematic synergies, and I think there's some, but in reality, these are different parts of the organization, and many of the decisions we make are like other health systems in terms of looking at the full range of evidence. Just to describe a little bit about the Johns Hopkins Health System for you. So, we're based in Baltimore, but we have expanded. So we have 5 hospitals in the Baltimore-Washington region, and we have a children's hospital in Florida. We have about 2.5 million. Okay, we'll see. Well, we have about 2.5 million patients in our EMR. We have expanded into population health to the extent so we have a health plan with about 350,000 members, accountable care organization with about 80,000 members, a new Medicare Advantage plan. And in that case, in that instance, we're acting more as the insurer payer in some sense, working with the provider groups. In terms of how we do our evidence generator on the research side, because I know they were asked a little bit to talk about that, fortunately, we've been doing well with NIH funding, which is, I guess, some ways, develops the traditional evidence. Although I think if you look, in some ways, NIH creates real-world evidence, in some ways better than pharma-supported results. So we're around $550 million of NIH funding, and that's gone up by 10%. And I bring that up just to say when I talk later today, it's about researchers have choices. Which way do they go? Do they have to go with real-world evidence? Is there still a market for, and a source of funding for the traditional research? And I would say at this point, there is still researchers that want to stick with traditional clinical trials are still finding the funding to do that. So our commercial funding for clinical trials is up about 25% over the last couple years. With around $150, $170 million. We start about 400 clinical trials that are ongoing around pharma-based research. So we have lots of activity in that area. The issue about, is it an academic center or community center, whatever community practice is, and I know we were talking about this a little bit in Boston too. What is a community practice? We have our 3, what I would say, community-based hospitals in terms of non-faculty physicians. We've improved the ability for them to participate in large clinical trials as well. So our 3 hospitals in this area, we have about 450 patients in a clinical trial at any one time. We have 23 research coordinators supporting them. So we're doing our best to transition into gathering that evidence outside of the traditional academic health center. And then just another number to put in perspective for you. So if we have about 2.5 million people in our EMR, this week we just passed 300,000 patients that are in our clinical research management database. So that means over the last 8 years, 300,000 patients that have an EMR number have been enrolled in some type of clinical protocol at Johns Hopkins. So in that case, if you use those numbers, you would say, somewhere around, 10% or so have been definitely in a clinical trial where there is research clinical level data collected. Now, from do the patients still look for real-world evidence? I know Sharon's going to talk about this, but I think they definitely do. And I'm still a general internist that sees patients. And for example, I saw a woman just last week who has developed breast cancer. She's put on one of the aromatase inhibitors and said, I want to know what is my risk of osteoporosis progressing, because she has osteoporosis. And she was a pretty smart patient, right? She goes, I've been on clinicaltrials.gov. That's the place you go for this information, right? I go into clinical trials, I put the drug information in, but none of those data sources include the long-term outcomes that she's looking for. And then she goes, I called the American Cancer Society because I figured they said, well, they really weren't much help either in trying to help me sort out what are the long-term risk of osteoporosis for her. So she was like, well, where do I turn for this, right? So it was a good example where you had to go through that process of a patient really looking for some information to help her make a choice of her particular treatment plan that we hadn't given her any of the information she needed directly from even the clinicaltrials.gov and open access to clinical trial research data. So to just talk a little bit about how our health plan on a coverage decision would look at making decisions a little bit, it's very similar. I mean, that what you've heard, right? We use Hayes or other data summary groups. We certainly we do consult with the experts at Johns Hopkins, and many of them having been involved in some of the registration studies or any of the studies that led to the guidelines. They may have their own particular view on them that we certainly consider. We do look at data not so much at the beginning on a coverage decision, but I think as we've seen here, very much looking at, are the patients in the system getting the drug actually the ones that were in the clinical trial? I think we're not talking about effectiveness. We're not really assessing the drug's effectiveness in that, but we're saying, this doesn't look like we've approved a drug that is not being used for the drugs that have the indication. Now, one of the areas that academic researchers are very interested is in expanding those indications, right? So it's approved for this, particularly when it comes to rare diseases or others. Are we looking to improve that? So we have a process to help faculty that are interested in that to move beyond the current indication. And it's very helpful for us to look at where drugs may be overutilized as well as underutilized to what we think is there. Now, would we think that our data by itself would really be good enough in an observational sense to make good judgments about the clinical effectiveness of our drugs? I think it would be stretching it. Our data warehouse is improving. I think we've heard a little bit about EMR data, and one thing that I've seen is that what you're really trying to do is change practitioners' behavior to a large extent, right? And the research, the standard FDA regulated clinical trial that collects research quality data, most practitioners have no insight into how that data was collected, and they believe it's very good. They know the EMR data because they put it in every day. And so if you say, this is a report based on electronic medical record data that, we've done some propensity score matching or something, we believe it's very complex. And I think they begin with this view that I don't know that data is really valid or accurate. And so I think you're trying to overcome that. Now, one of the things that I would say with EMR data, particularly when we're not in a closed system like Kaiser, is that the data sources that we're able to integrate in now to understand the full, the full activities or services or outcomes of our patients is definitely improving. I mean, every 6 months there's a new improvement. Being able to the National Drug Index, Death Index, to get that, getting dispensing data for some patients. For us in the state of Maryland, we're very fortunate to have a database called CRISP, which is our Health Information Exchange, which is 99% of the hospitals in the state of Maryland, and that we're able to use that for research. So any patient that we see that we want to do follow-up on, we can see in real time any hospitalizations, ER admissions, including lab tests associated with that. And because it's an opt-out system that frankly most people don't know they can opt out of, it's 99.5% of the population. And they really are doing a great job for both clinical and research. So the DC hospitals have joined with it, Delaware is joining with it, West Virginia is joining with it, and it's becoming a very good resource for Johns Hopkins, a little bit different than Kaiser. So when we have a patient that enrolls in a trial or in a long-term cohort, we can use this now to easily determine hospitalizations, death, ER visits across the thing. It will take much longer to get all ambulatory data in. That will be, I'm sure, a 5 or 10 year project, but very helpful for us. So I would say it's still clinical data, it's still EMR data. So right now we have the universe of data is clearly improving. Putting data in computational form so it's easier to look at for research is helping every day. And again, we get better when we work with groups. So whether it's PCORNAT or the ACTS and the CTSS or CTSA, whenever we work with other systems, it improves our data. And I really think we're much more likely to work in consortiums to look at more impressive outcome assessments as part of a consortium than in any individual. I would say, I mean, this is probably no big surprise to you, as opposed to a Kaiser at Johns Hopkins Health System, our ability to get practitioner or our clinicians, and again, they're a mixture of faculty and employed, but non-faculty, to follow practice guidelines or appropriate use of drugs is not as easy, right? So I guarantee you we have variability in that. On the other hand, at least for us, and part of this again has to do with the state of Maryland, where we have a Medicare waiver and we have global budgeting for our health system. So that means all of our practitioners are interested in value right now. And that is not, it comes hopefully from believing that we should be good stewards of our resources, but to a large extent, the system is making us think of value. And it is putting some of our surgeons and others in this difficult situation where more surgeries, more procedures is not to their benefit. And they're feeling that directly. So I do think that has been a change in at least how we've been looking at the issue about appropriate utilization of drugs and new therapies. And then finally, I would say, while we're focused on drugs for this conference, if you would say, in my view, what are the one group of physicians which still, I think, work outside of the way we think of evidence generation? And it has to be the procedurists and surgeons and where they still are very well served by taking an approved device, a new robotic surgery, a new this, to do it on 50 people, videotape how they did it, go to their conferences, talk about it as a retrospective case series, and they professionally do well. And And, but in our view, again, looking at these in terms of evidence, it is a high risk. What do patients know? And that many of these, the insurance issues do drive the issue. Does the insurance company know that this is a first time this procedure has been done in a human, or the first, of 5 or 10? So I think, and a group of innovators that are changing things, and we see this obviously with devices where there is real world generation, but I'm just telling you, at most academic health centers where they are not participating in systematic national registries and others, they are still developing their own system of evidence generation. So happy to take questions, and we look forward to the discussion. Thanks.
Thanks so much. If you have a clarifying question, please introduce yourself.
Yes, I have a clarifying question for Dan. So you particularly mentioned, your faculty physicians still tend to fall on the traditional randomized trial, either sponsored by NIH or the industry, for evidence generation. Do you think to what extent is due to the, the tradition phenomena, or is due to the fact they know they are in the academic medical center, they don't have the information from outpatient environment, or they don't have the information about the patient, who went out of the system? Do you know which is more the driving factor for them still fall back on the traditional randomized clinical trials? And do you think it's a good practical way or cost-efficient way to generate evidence?
Well, I think there is, the medical field still wants evidence that's generated from the traditional, and I think you're right, there's a lot with definitions that we're off, but, phase 2, and phase 3, they still look to start the process by, generating that type of evidence. And it's a controlled environment for the faculty member that I think is more comfortable for them than some of the more effectiveness real. I'm not saying we do. I was just looking. I think we have 4 pragmatic cluster trials going on right now. And maybe in the afternoon we'll talk about what that is. But it is a much less control. The faculty member that wanted to participate in in the more FDA type that we're thinking of, they do control the process. As soon as you go to pragmatic, you have to get the approval of the health system, of the medical director at each one of the clinics, access to the data. It's a very much a different way of working, and like I said, the funding for the traditional component is not drying up, and patients, for the most part, they understand that design. I mean, so I think. There isn't that urgency to change their approach right now.
But do you think the development in technology, especially you mentioned that health information exchange in Maryland, do you think those progresses and developments are changing your behavior a little bit?
Well, I do think. I mean, I'm telling you, the CRISP, the Health Insurance Information Exchange System, is definitely. Interesting researchers, let's put it that way. And whether they're NIH-funded cohorts, some of our the ALIVE cohort, the MESA, the multi-ethnic, study of atherosclerosis, they're using CRISP as their follow-up data. So I think it helps. Now, you still have this conflict between people that collect research quality data and whether they understand EMR data, right? And I'll just say, to me, what I always try to remind them about is that the EMR data actually has the best data on treatment received, or at least prescribed, right? So you do the best your cohorts, you're collecting all your individual data, and you ask the patient once a year, what drugs are you on? Were you in the hospital for what, right? it's not as good a data as you get the EMR. Now, if you would say sort of the real outcome data, they probably do a better job collecting it in standardized conditions than those of us that do it in the more clinical setting. But I'll just say the other thing: we are really pushing all researchers to use the EMR and merge the data together. So our policy is that any researcher that collects clinical grade data, whether it's imaging, lab tests, or whatever, that goes in the EMR. And so that's the ability to start merging these and not thinking of these data as totally separate.
Thank you.
Terrific. Let's move on now to our final panelist, Sharon Terry.